All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Jesse Randall. I am the founder and CEO of Sweater, and I'm excited to be hosting you today for Founder Saga. The quick overview, Sweaters. I mean, we're here to open up the venture capital asset class to everybody. We're getting closer every day. We've had some big stuff happen this year, but we've still got some roads to go down with the SEC and keep building the product. So in the meantime, we built Founder Saga so that we could tell more founder stories, because it's hard being in the trenches, and I think that all of us need to hear the reality of what it's like to make it through the other side. And of all the stories that I've heard about the earliest stage, these guys at Accept Inc., Nick and Adam, have probably one of the most remarkable stories I've seen in terms of going through the really tough times and making it onto a ship that is just really taken off. And I'm excited to dive in with these guys. So Adam, Nick, awesome to have you.
Thanks. Great to have you here, man. And, credit to you and, to just get all this great content together. And also just to the entrepreneurs, community. I think that's what you're doing at Sweater is super exciting from an investment perspective and social perspective, but also just getting this content out there. I know for one, we've come a long way. We have a long way to go, but happy to pay it forward in the ecosystem any way I can. And I think Sweater is the same mission. So this is our pleasure, and thank you for having us.
Yeah, and it's not too often that we get to share this story. Honestly, it's really cool to sit back and sort of reflect on some of those old times. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, the good old days, right?
Yeah, the good old days, exactly.
Something like that, Jesse.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and dive in. So I just want to kind of preview this with how I met you guys. So I moved to Colorado 18 months ago. And when we were first looking at Colorado, we reached out and we were trying to get in touch with some people that were here. And Nick was one of these guys that was like, who are these crazy people that reached out to me that don't know me? And so we came to Colorado, and Nick met up with us, and we've been friends ever since. It's been amazing to watch you guys make this progress. And so I'm not going to preview the story too much. We'll get into it. But before we get into the story, the dramatic story of how you guys went from trying to buy a bank to getting into Y Combinator and doing everything that you're doing now, it's just fantastic. So let's start with who you guys are. Give us the quick overview of what Accept Inc. is doing now. Anything that you want to provide to kind of give us an idea of like your reach in the world and the impact that Accept Inc. is having out there. Just give us that quick intro, maybe like 3 to 5 minutes.
All right. Nick, you want to take point?
Yeah, sure. So basically just an overview of what Accept Inc. is. We're a mortgage company. We upgrade any offer into a cash offer. The way we do that is pretty simple. We'll purchase homes on behalf of buyers that we've already approved for a mortgage. Then we sell the home back to them at the same price. So you can think about us sort of like a rich aunt or uncle who fronts cash for buyers, allows them to compete, especially in this crazy market that we're seeing right now. It's crazy throughout the entire world. Throughout the entire country for sure. There's an inventory shortage everywhere, which causes a lot of buyers to have to compete against other buyers. And when inventory is so small and buyer demand is so high, you get a lot of bidding wars. And so we're there basically to allow buyers to compete, in the market and level the playing field for buyers who maybe have saved up, enough money to buy a house with 3%, 5%, 10%, 20% down even, but don't have that $500,000 sitting in their bank account ready to go out and buy a home with. The good news is that we have the $500,000 to do that with, and we'll front the cash for those buyers and allow them to do it. And that's sort of what Accept Inc. is on a high level.
Fantastic. Adam, do you want to kind of give us an idea of like the progress you've made and where you guys are operating and whatnot?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's been a roller coaster. I mean, I'm not sure if there is such thing in startups as an overnight success story. And if there was, we are certainly not among them. Yeah, I mean, we've definitely come a long way. That's for sure. I mean, we started the company towards the end of 2016. We iterated on different models with really our guidings. I guess to really bring it back, when we started what would become Accept Inc., we started with 2 really company defining questions. And those were, if we could do real estate all over again, how would it be done? Followed by what is the best, smoothest transaction in real estate? And how do we provide that experience to everybody? And it does not take Albert Einstein to figure out that a cash offer that can close in 3 days is a lot better than waiting a month and a half to know if a mortgage is going to go through the biggest, most important financial transaction of most of our lives, at least. So end of 2016, Nick, Ian, third co-founder who's not on here, and I went out to go, I guess, use those questions as kind of our North Star. How do we turn every offer into a cash offer, every buyer into a cash buyer? I won't go through all the details, but we iterated basically on different models for about 2 years. Honestly, Jesse, iterating is just a diplomatic word for failing. But through all of that, I like to think that we just became an encyclopedia of 1,000 ways that this idea wouldn't work, and because of that, finally figuring out the one that did. The one that Nick just described is, of course, the model that we ended up, working with. We had a couple of big breaks, got really lucky. We were accepted to the Y Combinator class of winter 19. Literally the pitch to the YC partners about why they should invest in founders in a venture that had really no success to date other than, a bunch of potholes and ways that we had failed, was just that, again, that we had the experience, if you will, to know what would finally work, and that we had spent 2 years essentially with our customer, getting nowhere fast, but getting somewhere important. And YC was big, got us the ability to raise our first round of funding, taught us a lot, got to meet a lot of entrepreneurs, some of which were whom are our age, which was, again, no small advantage in what is a lonely business, which is entrepreneurship. So that was great. The community was great. Raising our first round of funding was great. So 2019, we went out, we launched. To give you an idea, I think 2019 was what I call that the year where everybody held their beer for a second. Like, hey, is this idea actually going to work? Can we actually, upgrade buyers to cash buyers and not take on too much risk and without charging additional cost to buyers, sellers, or agents? And as you know, Jesse, not everything was smooth. You were one of our buyers, though I think your transaction went pretty well, all things considered, but it was still a little rocky. There was still a lot of things to learn. I think you were transaction number 7. I'm sure Nick knows.
Yeah,
so mighty grateful to our first users, that's for sure. But we've definitely come a long way since the first users. In 2019, we did like 14 deals. In 2020, we did 149, which was really exciting. The team, hit close, just over 40 people. So been growing pretty rapidly. In 2021, we're looking forward to, I think, will be another high growth and very important year. So to say the least, exciting stuff ahead, and also come a long way, and grateful for the ride. That's for sure.
Yeah. And I'll add one thing there. I think, one of the coolest things that we're starting to see right now is just some of the stories that are coming out of this. You talk about the traction and the growth, but along the way, you look at individual deals, and there's some really cool things that happen. Recently, we had a buyer who put 5% down, who beat 39 offers on a property, which they would never have been able to win without us. And I think that's a really cool thing, that we're creating the ability for people to win homes in the best neighborhoods, the best school districts possible, that they wouldn't have been able to win without us. And that's a really cool thing to be a part of, and to be able to level that playing field, like I said before. But we've seen the 5% down buyers beat, 20, 25 offers consistently. That's common with us. And what's interesting is that they're rarely the highest offer either. And that's a really cool feature that we have, is that, we buy everything else in the world with cash or with a credit card. No one buys anything with a check anymore. And a mortgage today is basically just a check, right? It's a paper promise saying, in 47 days, I promise you that somebody's going to give me money to buy this house. With us, we're saying, no, actually, we're promising you the day that we actually write this offer, that it's a cash offer and it's going to go through. And that speed and certainty is what allows, buyers to be able to win with us.
That's awesome. So how many states are you guys operating in now?
We're just in Colorado right now. We have done deals in other states as test markets, but Colorado got really busy really quickly. And so we just sort of focused in Colorado for a while. We are going to be launching in another market, hopefully sometime this year. But definitely focused mainly in Colorado.
Yeah. Well, hey, milk it, man. Colorado is hot.
Yeah. I think it's also just about, make sure you got it really down. I'm as impatient as they come. I'm hands down the most impatient on our team to grow and expand. But one thing that you learn is that, yes, growth is in its own right is critical and important, but the type of growth is even more so. And if, I think we've opted to go deeper into existing markets, really learn why and how the product works, how to get it in front of the most people, how to make ourselves the most efficient. And then we want to take the lessons that we have learned, are sure to learn in the future, and then map them and templatize that into other markets. So I think it's like where growth kind of meets, there's tactical growth and then there's like strategic. I think we're opting the more strategic route. It hurts me a little bit because I would love to be everywhere, But I do think, and I know Nick agrees that, doubling down on our best version of ourselves, making sure we're airtight on how we do things and the process before expanding is the right way to do it. Again, it allows us to really hone the craft, I suppose.
Yeah. There's a lot of wisdom in doing that, right? And doubling down. That's really good.
Yep.
So you kind of gave us an idea of what that back of napkin, idea was at the time, right? But I want to go back, to when you guys chose to make a big leap. Now, I know that if you guys don't mind divulging and telling about the big decision you made between education and building your startup, what, did you guys coordinate that? Did you all like line up on the edge of the cliff at the same time and like jump into the water? How did you make that decision, and how the heck did you get to Colorado?
Yeah.
It's a great question, and I'll let Adam speak to his side of it, because it's a personal question, honestly, right? Because you work really hard throughout high school to get into good schools, and we did, and we were lucky enough to get into those, and you have to make that decision, I think, at that point. And I think taking it back a little bit, the summer before we ended up leaving school, so our freshman summer, we just sort of got together over the summer and just looked at the real estate industry and just saw that there were a lot of issues with it. We had an idea at the time that was totally different than what the idea is now, but just sort of in the space, and we're like, look, there's a lot of things here that we can change. Went back to school in 2016 and realized you can't really build a business while you're in college. And sort of that next summer, we said, all right, well, if we actually want to try to do this in earnest, now is the best time in our lives to go out there and do it. We're 20 years old. We're not tied down to anything. We don't have mortgage to pay or whatever. So we're good to go. Don't have family yet. So let's just go out there and see what we can do. And that was sort of my mentality at the end of that summer. And the reason why I was like, hey, I'm just going to go for it. I think I was much more ready to jump. And Adam will tell you why, I guess, on his end, but than Adam was, I think, at that point. School was fine, but I didn't really super enjoy it, I guess. And I also knew that I'd always wanted to do something that was just different, cool, unique. And I didn't know what I was getting into. Different, cool, unique are three words that may describe a very small portion of this experience. But I think that we had an opportunity to change something. And I think the reason why I did it, and I wouldn't have done it without Adam dropping out as well. The reason why I did it eventually was, I made that decision. Adam made it independently. And then when we both said, hey, we're going to do this, that made it a lot easier for me to be like, hey, I'm going to have somebody who's there with me in it 100%. And that's something that was really important, I think, when we left. So it's something that I couldn't imagine doing this alone, for sure. And again, we've added a co-founder since then as well. But I think that, there's something about being able to work with somebody who you have worked with before, who Adam is my best friend and has been since we left college. And so that's, I think, been a really, really important factor in deciding to leave as well. So I guess those are all of my reasons for doing it. And, my parents were definitely, definitely a little bit concerned at the time. But they get over it once you start to achieve some sort of success. And it took us a while to get there. But I think, that was something that definitely played an impact, as well as making sure that, they were okay with it. But at the end of the day, it was my decision. I did it. And, we're here where we are now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think I agree with a lot of what Nick said. I think a big difference, though, between like Nick and myself when we were considering leaving school was, I really enjoyed school very much. A bit of a dork, and I just had a great time. So, I certainly was nothing that was pushing me away from school, or it just was the fact that this opportunity, including the opportunity just to work with Nick and Ian, our third co-founder and CTO, was really pulled by it. I have to say. And, it was tough. I mean, it wasn't like this easy, just moment decision. It was slowly and then all at once kind of thing. I just decided to pull the trigger. And, actually, in a lot of respects, I'm grateful because, my school was very supportive of me actually leaving to go do this and taking a leave of absence and whatever. And so that was great. And I really liked having the kind of their support. But, I think Nick hit an important point about like age, right? I mean, like at our age, even right now, like, I feel like it only takes harder. It gets harder to take risks as you get older. That's at least what I've seen. And I think thematically, as more people are involved, more stakeholders and all that. Like, you can't be as selfish, if you will, right? You've got, maybe you have a family, maybe you have parents to take care of, all these different things that just cause natural friction to taking risk, and for all the right reasons, right? That's not a bad thing. It's just like life happens fast. And, when I was actually able to, I guess, contemplate that, in a lot of ways, leaving school to do this was the smartest decision you could ever make in terms of timing. That is when I think I ended up pulling the trigger alongside with Nick. Because again, like, it sounds bizarre to say, but like, in this case, leaving school to start a startup without completing it was, I think, one of the smartest ways to do it, if you're going to do it. I mean, you're going to be, you went in bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I certainly did. I think Nick did in a lot of ways too. Like every founder probably does first time, right? But definitely worth it at the end of it. And, it's cool, through that all, again, through Y Combinator. And I was lucky enough to be a part of the Theo Fellowship, which is great for, other entrepreneurs that actually left school to start their own, amazing companies. You realize that there are other people doing it. We're certainly not the majority, far from it, but I think it will be more common practice that, that people will do that. They may or may not choose to go back to school, but at least be more flexible in like their career plans and see where life takes them, and hopefully take more risks. I think the world would be a little bit better off if people took a little bit more risks instead of maybe going down a more standard track.
Yeah. Well, we'll call you guys the early adopters for changing the higher education model. Yes. I'd say you guys got your money's worth in education in the last few years. Okay, so there's a few milestones I want to focus on. All right, so there was you guys choosing to leave school and come do this stuff full time. There was getting into Y Combinator, which was a big moment, right? And then funding events and other things that came after that. So how long was it between the time you left school and the time that you got into Y Combinator?
It was 2.5 years. Yeah.
Man, that's a lot of frozen burritos.
That's a lot. Yeah, peanut butter and jelly was clutch, honestly. Good protein, little sweetness. It was perfect.
I'm a big fan of like the $7.99 chicken, like Whole Foods or Trader Joe's or Costco chickens. That's what I survived on. So it works, man. It's a lifestyle choice, that's for sure.
Man, it's a winning equation to buy food like that rotisserie chicken from Costco that they're losing money on. I mean, dude, you just can't get a better deal than that.
It's like everything else, man. You got to be disciplined. You got to be like tunnel vision. Get the chicken, pick it up, and walk out. That's all you got to do. Okay, and
tunnel vision is
also pay.
Okay, so 2.5 years, guys, that's a long time. So, you knew what you wanted to do before you left, right? I was going to ask you that earlier. You had the idea before you chose to leave school, right? Or did you come up with this idea after you chose to leave?
It was after. We had an idea. It just wasn't this one. And it was, it was sort of iterations of it. I think for the past, like Adam was saying before, like during that time, we knew we wanted to basically create a better version of a mortgage offer to make it as good as a cash offer as possible, as close to a cash offer as possible. And so this sort of simulated cash offer product is what we started to go after for a while. And we chased a lot of the wrong things, I think, throughout that time. Again, all useful things that we learned. But I think we kept going after the fact that we could disguise this offer and make it almost look like or seem like a cash offer. And one of the biggest things we learned is that nuance doesn't sell in real estate, right? You're either a cash offer or you're not. And that's something that, it took us a while to learn. We weren't, talking to agents every single day. And then we actually started talking to agents every single day at one point. And we're like, oh, wait a second. This is why this is not working, is because they need it to literally be certain to go through. And that's, I think, what we ended up settling on after that, but it took us a while to figure that out. So that was one. And then the second lesson we sort of learned is, and you hit on this a little bit, Jesse, but like, you can't really trust anybody in this industry to do your core competencies. So obviously lending is a core competency of ours. And we, tried to partner with a bank once, we tried to buy a bank, we tried to do a lot of different things with banks and lenders, and it just didn't work out. Every time something crazy happened or it blew up, or there was some regulator who's like, whatever, like, I don't like these kids. Like, that was sort of the story of our lives for a long time. Because, once you sort of try to outsource something that is so core to your business and try to do something unique in the lending space, if you don't own that lending piece yourself, you run into a lot of problems and a lot of roadblocks very quickly. And so we learned those two things, I think, over those 2.5 years. And by the time we got to Y Combinator and we walked in there with, $200 left in our bank accounts and just hoping for the best. That was the story that we told them, is that we learned all of this throughout these 2.5 years. And this is why we think that this is the one that's going to work.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So along the way, I mean, you guys tried all kinds of stuff. I mean, the most, eye-opening one to me, or eye-popping one, was that at some point you tried to acquire a bank, right? I mean, you guys were trying to figure out, any angle to make this happen. So what's the acquiring a bank story? Yeah. How did you guys come up with that idea, and where did it not work out?
Yeah. So to start with that, let's go to like why somebody would want to buy a bank in a fintech company. Maybe it's obvious, maybe it's not. We know then, and honestly, we still know now that there are definitely benefits to being able to operate under a bank, because a bank provides basically a uniform regulatory regime, because you're usually regulated by the federal government and all that, versus, state mortgage banks or mortgage lenders like us, where you have to go state by state and follow different compliance and regulatory regimes and regulators and all that. So bank brings uniformity in terms of regulations and compliance, which in our space is really, really already challenging. And then two, a bank also brings instant scalability if done correctly, right? So, a bank can do business in all 50 states. As a mortgage lender, you have to get state by state licensing. So you have to literally go to every state and apply to get a license. So that's why a bank was so attractive to us. The second that we knew we wanted to be in the lending business, if you will, mortgage lending business. Mm-hmm. We got it. At some point we just cold calls a bunch. So once we figured that, and we also felt like it would be a great platform to raise money on, honestly, from a strategic perspective, if we can identify a bank, use it for its scalability, use it to, as a platform to expand our offering, we thought that would be really helpful. Honestly, I think in retrospect, that was more a cart before the horse. You prove the business, and then you can demonstrate how and why you should scale it. And then you learn a bunch of other things of why necessarily banks aren't the best way to go for our business. But yeah, the story was, I think it was in 2017, right, Nick, when we started just cold calling bank owners, just being like, hey, do you want to sell your bank? Literally, that was it. What else can you say? Literally just smile, dial. People look at the biggest, on Google we'll search, what are the biggest banks in the country? We actually looked for what are the smallest banks in the country, the shit kickers, if you will. And we went after those. We actually got a couple bank owners online, which was cool. Most of them didn't proceed farther than a couple calls. One went pretty far, so far that I think we got on the phone with a regulator at the St. Louis Fed to talk about what we wanted to do. So we basically pitched him a version of what Accept Inc. became. He hated the idea, absolutely thought it was bonkers and ridiculous. And he's like, I will never let that was either a regulator doing his job or crushing innovation. I think time will tell. No
vision.
No, they don't really get any extra credit for intrepid thinking, regulators. And that's not necessarily a slight against them, but it's just, I guess, the nature of their work. So yeah, try to buy a bank, a few banks, try to line up financing for it. I think if we found a bank that would have worked, it would have actually happened. We weren't that far off, I think.
Yeah. It was interesting because I remember the one of the owners that we spoke to, we were having some trouble in the beginning because, it's hard to call up bank owners and ask them to sell their bank to two 20-year-old kids. But right. when we got one of them to say maybe, we called him back and we're like, look, where are you right now? We're going to fly wherever you are tomorrow and we're going to meet you in person. And we wanted to come across as very serious and whatever. And he's like, I'm in Phoenix. I'm like, okay. So we were in New Hampshire at the time. It was like $700 to fly to Phoenix the next day, but we did it. And we end up in Phoenix the next day and we're talking to him and he's like, all right, we'll entertain it, whatever. This is the one we got really far with the St. Louis Fed on. And I think we actually had pretty much all the money lined up, or the investors lined up to actually help us buy it at that point too. But it's interesting because a few things, and this is sort of a theme for us, but a few things sort of went against us. One, obviously the business model was too unique for them, but two, it was our age again, right? It was, wait a second, what's your experience? And I remember I was in the room when Adam was on the call with the Fed. And they were like, they asked him what his experience was. And he was like, well, I was on the honor committee at Harvard. That was what he said for his experience. Because there's no other thing you can do as far as well, have you run a bank before? No, obviously we haven't. And so I think that's another piece that sort of kicked us in that industry. And I think if you look at all the bank owners that we spoke to, all of them are over the age of 65, and they've been doing this for a really, really long time. And so that was, I think, the trickiest part for us in that venture. But hey, you just got to go for it and see what happens. And we've done that with a lot of different things, that, the bank purchase being one of them.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, like, I think that's one of the things that I love about that story, is that it's just, you kind of have to have unfettered optimism, right? You have to think about doing things that no one would ever think is rational, and explore it and see what's there.
Yeah.
I think that's part of like pushing the limits and finding out where's the edge of this bubble we all live in, so that you can pop it, right?
Totally. That's something that, and even with some of the people that we've reached out to and who are advisors to us today, like, one of the things we were trying to do is figure out, as we were doing this, okay, like, we have to look at all the rules and regulations and make sure that we're, in compliance with everything, with RESPA and, all these different 4-letter, 3-letter acronyms in real estate. And what we thought there was like, well, what if we just reached out to the people who wrote the regulations to actually figure out, because they'll know where the holes are in the regulations or what we can and can't do. And so we went directly to the people who worked with, Elizabeth Warren to create the CFPB, all those people, right? And those are the people that are now our advisors on our team. The guy who made the appraisal 1004 form, we went directly to them, and we're like, we may not even have a shot to get in touch. But what's interesting is a lot of these people who are sort of high up and, are very well respected, they don't hear from people very often, particularly entrepreneurs trying to build something. And it's almost like it's a reverse effect, because people don't think that they're going to answer. They don't reach out. But we just reached out to everybody, and it turns out that we got the highest response rate from people who were at the top of their game, or the hardest we thought to be able to respond to. And that's something that's a huge learning that I always tell entrepreneurs, is like, you just got to go to the top dog, and they're actually more likely to respond than some people, at a lot of these places that you're looking at.
Yeah. I mean, Put yourself in that person's shoes, right? I mean, like, they see Nick and I even now, right? And even at this age, trying to do something important, or, big, or at least ambitious, if nothing else, right? That you kind of run a route for the underdog. And I think I've been pleasantly surprised to see how people who are outside of the entrepreneurs ecosystem actually supported us. Like, I will tell you, it's one of the most heartwarming things ever. Like, for all the dark, scary things that come with entrepreneurship, and there's so many of them, I have been pleasantly surprised. And I would probably say Nick probably too, about how much good we've seen in all of it. And I just like sharing that, because I think it's so important. You gotta hang tight, hang on loosely sometimes, but you'll be surprised at the people that come in to help. And I certainly have been. I'm certainly lucky to count some of those people who answered my call, our call, a couple of years ago, as not just advisors and friends, but just, co-conspirators in what we do here.
That's awesome. Okay. So at some point you guys had to have gotten worn out. I mean, what were you feeling as you were getting into the 2-year marker? I mean, what was going through your minds? I mean, at that point, Y Combinator was just fantasy, really. I mean, Y Combinator, it's kind of up there, right?
Yeah.
What was going through your heads? I mean, what were you feeling?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, did we ever get worn out? Yes, absolutely. But I think there's one time that comes to mind in particular, and it was in Denver. We were working with a bank, and the bank partnership basically blew up, and, it was sort of our last chance, I think, is what we thought at the time. And I remember that feeling when I saw that it was over, and you sort of just, your heart sinks a little bit, and you're like, all right, well, I guess this is it. Like, and so I think we'd raised like a small, tiny round that year, and we had about 15K left. And this was towards the end of the year of 2018. And Adam and I, Adam called me, and he's like, we need to talk. And we went to L5 in Denver, sat on the rooftop up there. I still remember. We got there at 5:00, and we left at midnight. And those 7 hours were sort of the conversation started by like, what are we doing? Like, why are we doing this anymore? Like, should we just, pack up and go back to school or whatever? I don't even know what we were going to do at that point. And that's how it started. And I think we spent the entire night trying to figure out what we were going to do. And Adam led with that, and I tried to convince Adam he was wrong. He tried to convince me that I was being an optimistic fool about like, where we stood at that time. And that was one of the hardest conversations we've had ever. But it was the only 7 hours that we actually considered sort of packing up shop. And I think at the end of that, we said, look, if we don't get anything by the end of the year that actually will move this company forward, that's it. We're going to pack our bags and call it a 2.5 years. But if we do, we're going to keep going. And I think one thing that we also said was, we have $15,000 left. We're going to take basically all of it, give it to the contractors that we were working with at the time. We didn't have any employees, just contractors who we were working with. And we gave them as much of it as we could and said, we can't pay you anymore. Sorry. Which was really hard to do. And then, sort of through the end of the year, we just worked our ass off and tried to get into every accelerator program, talking to VCs, whatever it took to get there. And then that sort of leads into the Y Combinator story. But, obviously the story goes that 7 days before the end of the year, we ended up getting into Y Combinator. And that sort of 7 days was it. And I think that was what was so cool, is that it sort of culminated. And that's why we say Y Combinator sort of saved the company in that sense, is like, we literally had a promise that was what we were going to do as a company at that point. And that was sort of the hardest time in the company's life, was right then. But again, I think we didn't change the drive. We didn't change the fight after that conversation. It was harder than ever because we wanted it to continue and succeed. And we were able to pull it off.
Yeah. I think Nick basically captured everything, but yeah, no, I mean, to say the least, if I didn't even go out and say it, if Nick wasn't there, I would have quit. Just flat out, like, just, you do get so worn out, and, you do, and especially with school, it was such a, not an easy, but it was a comfortable, it was a, forward moving, I don't know, initiative that, you could take and you could finish. And, we were only 22 probably. Right. So we could go back really easily, fit right back in, almost like nothing happened, wash our hands with it, grateful that we gave it a shot. Yeah. But no, we kept going. We kept going. And it was conversations like Nick, I could tell you exactly where we were sitting at their exact restaurant, what the view was, what the weather was like. It ends up, it's weird moments like that end up becoming really bookmarked chapters in, your story as a founder. And it's what you'll take with you, no matter what comes of Accept Inc. Right. To get into Y Combinator 7 days before the year end, that was sublime. I mean, how could you, it's like, that was, I call it, like, without any, sense of cliche, that it was a Cinderella story, and it's funny. I'm not here to, like, I think YC is for some people, it's not for others, whatever. Some people love it, some people hate it, but I will say, at that moment, at that time, I think, and maybe even selfishly, I think YC took a bet on us. And I think it takes a bet on a lot of entrepreneurs like us, and it gives them their start. And I know it was a night and day difference after that. So I'm grateful for that. And that was huge.
Yeah. I know the feeling. I have complete empathy with you guys, not in the getting into Y Combinator part, but that feeling of, like, that was almost like a final shot. Right. And now what's the big decision? I mean, that wrenching feeling in your gut, of like, where do you go next? And I mean, how awesome that, you guys were able to help each other along through that. Being alone is tough, and it shows how important it is to have a co-founder. Thank you for sharing that. I know that's really personal and raw. So thank you for sharing that story.
Absolutely.
So let's real quick, let's talk about the Y Combinator story, because that was also a wild thing. I mean, not just the fact that you got into Y Combinator, but the way you got into Y Combinator is wild. So I don't know how much you guys can share, but if you tell that story to whatever degree you can, I think it's highly worthwhile.
All right, Nick, I think you just you go for it, my man. You take point.
All right. So this is a fun one. So I'll start with, I guess, so we got an interview at Y Combinator after we sent in the application. So we're like, all right, like, this is, and we had applied once before, like a while ago, I think. We applied late that time. This time we also applied late. I think we applied the last possible day you could apply, like 2 minutes before the deadline. So we're consistent there. But so basically we ended up going out to Silicon Valley for the interview. We were sitting in a coffee shop called Paris Baguette, right in Mountain View, California. And I remember at the time, the model was that we would buy the home cash, but we would only buy it cash if something bad were to happen, like if a mortgage would fall through or an appraisal would fall through, something like that.
Kind of like an insurance policy.
Like an insurance policy.
Yeah.
And this was 30 minutes before the interview. And we're like, they're not going to understand that. Let's pivot. So we pivoted 30 minutes before, and we basically said that we're just going to buy the home cash every single time. And we're like, should we just do this right now? We're like, yeah, let's do it. And so we decided that that's what we were going to do. And it was funny because when we decided that, we were also like, actually, this is probably a better model anyway. So it's probably going to work better because if we're going to be able to describe it best, then consumers are going to be able to describe it best as well. And that actually ended up being the best pivot we ever made, but it was over coffee, just trying to explain our product a little bit better. And so we walk into Y Combinator, and at the time you had to fill out an application, whatever. And we look at the app, and the first thing we notice, so you're just going through the questions to see what we wrote. And the first thing we notice is that the equity percentages added up to 110%.
So that's like the cap table. Yeah.
Yeah, the cap table, which means we really screwed that up. So we were going in with really nothing to lose at that point, and clearly they knew that happened. So I remember we walked into the room, and the first thing Adam said was like, he said, we know the equity percentage is added up to 110%, but that's because we're going to give 110% to this program, and we stand by that. and they laughed harder than I've ever seen people laugh ever, which was great because I don't think anybody sort of led with that. And from then on, they sort of view this as like just these ridiculous people who walked in and did this interview. And it was funny because we did the first interview, and they'll invite you back for a second interview sometimes, particularly if they're not really sure what's going on or just want to see more of you. And so we got invited back to the second one. And the second interview was 5-on-2. So 5 people in the room, 15 minutes. They were interrupting each other's questions in the middle of the questions. But Adam and I just sort of sat back and answered them the best we could, and weren't nervous by it at all because we had been through so much at that point that we just sort of answered the questions as they came. And
nerves of steel,
basically. Right. So that night, the whole point of Y Combinator, the whole, like, I guess, famous part of Y Combinator about the acceptance is you find out the night you have the interview, whether you get in or not. And if you get in, you get a phone call. And if you don't get in, you get an email. And so I got to
mind you, we're already having on the second interviews, like YC's whole thing is you have one interview, it's 10 minutes long, and then you know whether you get in or not, and there's no suspense. So mind you, we're now having had 2 interviews with like 2 different partners at the fund, and keep going.
Yeah. So 2 interviews. After that, we had a lot of wine that night. It was great. We were very, very, just like at that point, we're just like, we'll see what happens. Right. So I remember I was flying back, and Adam was staying another night, and Adam called me I was in the airport, and he's like, Nick, we got an email, and email means you're out. But then he's like, it's not what you think. And what they said is, we don't believe anything you guys just told us. So we need proof that you tried to buy a bank. We need proof that you had this bank partner that blew up. We need proof that you lived in an apartment that you rented from a lady on Dancing with the Stars with no lights in the apartment and a pickle in the refrigerator that was a sacred pickle. Like all the things that we had gone throughout our entire 2 years, they didn't believe it. And so we had to actually go through and prove that we had done all these things. And it took another 2 weeks after the interview. The interview was like on the 12th of December, I believe, or something like that. And 12 days later, finally, they're like, all right, you know what? Like, you guys are crazy and you're going to do something crazy. It may be this, it may be something else, but we want you to be a part of this program. And that was, again, the call that sort of saved our company. But it was just a sort of an amalgamation of those few years of like, yeah, they didn't even think what we did was real. And we might've been the first maybe in the history of Y Combinator. It's basically what they told me after we got in. So pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Wow, that is fantastic. Adam, anything to add? That was a great story.
I think that about captures it. Again, there's so many like funny moments that led up to that YC interview. The interview itself was hysterical, and like, I think it's funny. Like, I remember there was I told my brother this. I was actually sitting in this was the night after we got the dreaded email that actually wasn't dreaded. They just wanted proof. I remember I told my brother, it was my twin brother, Ben, that day, like, I feel like it's like, can you go one more round? Right. That's this concept. I remember my boxing coach, I think, created this I don't know, like what was the term? It was like the miracle round is what he called it. So it's that concept that he said that where, a boxer goes just, gets hit a little bit too hard, overcomes, enough hits and enough pain to just go one more round, right? And then ultimately, and win or achieve, right? And I couldn't help but feel that Y Combinator, everything that led up to it, that was our miracle round. That was where we just endured a little bit more pain than anybody thought possible, went a little bit farther than anybody would think logical, and got it. And I look back at those are some of the warmest, most amazing times that we had. And if it stopped there, I think it would have all been well worth it. It's nice to bookmark.
That's amazing. Amazing story. Well, I mean, I guess the summary since Y Combinator was that was a successful program. You came out and were able to launch a product. You built some technology around it. You've been able to raise multiple lines of funding, including warehouse lines that are able to fund you actually doing these cash transactions. And yeah, I've been able to intimately get involved with you guys on how that whole model works. And you've created something really, really incredible and very special. So I'm so happy that you guys have made it so far. And what a story to pass on to other founders. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's the thing. It's like, it's not to say that we've made it by any measure. Like we've got a long way to go, but sure as hell, we intend to get there, wherever there is. Yeah, I think, again, like paying it forward is such, I think paid forward is like my three favorite words in the English language. And if we can share, the good times, the bad times, everything in between times and the ridiculous times, I feel like it adds to like the canon of understanding of, what is it like to be an entrepreneur and perhaps even more so, what's it like to be a first-time entrepreneur? I think the entire ecosystem is just better off for stories like ours and other stories as well that just shine light on everything, and hopefully if we do our job right, make people feel a little less lonely, because I think a bunch of entrepreneurs have been there before. So absolutely, we're happy to share it, Jesse.
Well, sometime you guys are gonna have to tell me the sacred pickle story, because I didn't know about that one. But to end this thing, here's what I'd like each of you to take just a minute or two, take the mic, and just imagine you're talking to these founders who are either currently in the trenches like you guys were, or who are thinking about jumping in. What would you want them to know from your experience that would make their probability of success a little higher?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for me, the biggest advantage you can have as an entrepreneur is don't be shy. I think that's something that, me growing up, which me now is very different than me as a kid. But when I was a kid, I was the shy little kid who hid behind, the door or whatever. Like that was me in middle school. And I started to come out of my shell a little bit more in high school. And then I realized, like, what am I even doing? Like I should just go out there and just try to do whatever I can and try to achieve the goals that I want to achieve. And I think one of the biggest things and one of the biggest sort of pushbacks that I see a lot from younger entrepreneurs. And again, I'm a young entrepreneur, so I'm not really speaking from that much experience, but I think the idea is like, people will say, well, I've been thinking about this idea for, 3 or 4 months now. And, I'm really, sort of still getting there and formulating it and whatever. And I'm like, just go call someone or do something or make it actionable. Because if you don't do that, you just sort of end up on this sort of lull, I think. And I think the don't be shy piece of it for me is like I said before, you always want to go and reach out to the top, reach out to people who can push you forward as quickly as possible. Don't be afraid to get on a call with whoever. I remember I used to email people and the subject line of the emails was "fuck you." That was the subject line of the email. And I had a 90% response rate to those emails. And it was awesome. And I got in touch with so many crazy people because of that subject line. I had another one where it was, I'm 21 and I'm trying to buy a bank. And I would get a bunch of response from that too. So it's like, again, you really can't be shy. You really can't be, just scared to try those types of things. And I think that the biggest holdback that people have is like, well, I don't know if I want to do this or do that, but I think you just have to be pretty much, not reckless, but as close to it as you can possibly get, especially in the beginning and early stages, and knock down those doors. If you want to move your company forward fast, And I think that's a big piece of it for me that I've learned throughout this. And I hope that everyone else, learns that as they sort of go through this as well, especially as first-time founders.
Excellent.
Yeah. It's interesting. And, I think philosophically, everybody has to make their own decision as far as whether you want to be an entrepreneur. I think, I actually oftentimes tell people don't be an entrepreneur. Like, people come to me and, I can tell that they're like wondering whether it makes sense, and, maybe they're a little bit more risk averse. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. But I think people should be very intentional about whether they join us and be eyes wide open. That's part of the reason why I like doing things like this, because, hopefully this helps scales our story. So people can understand that, it's really hard to go from, as cliche as it sounds, from 0 to 1. Right. And I would say that if you do go down that path, find 1 or 2 co-founders that you can do this with. Because I think it's almost impossible to do it by yourself. I certainly couldn't do it, and surely people have, but I would say it's almost, I think, a requirement at this point. I think some line that I always look back on, and that I really like, it's, the quote that everybody lives 2 lives, and the second one begins when you realize you only live 1. And, what that means to me, and how that kind of has formed some of my thinking over time is, just to make the most of the moment and try to understand that, yeah, there's risk to being an entrepreneur and all that, but sometimes the biggest risk is just not taking it at all. And for the entrepreneurs that I do recommend, hey, you should totally go, you should do this, right? This is worth pursuing. I'm not doing it based on their idea. Honestly, their idea doesn't have enough traction to even be able to make any assessment of the likelihood of success. I'm doing it because, they'll regret, I think, like I would have, if you didn't just take your shot, right? You didn't get your at bat, you didn't give it to yourself. And I think, you fast forward, what are you going to want to have seen yourself do when you're 80 years old? Take that risk, or, kind of stay down the more trotted path. And again, it's not to say the trotted path is wrong, but I think if you're feeling that ounce of like, if I don't do this, I'll regret it, I think there's a really good chance that that's signal, not noise. And you should probably follow that. And remember that, yeah, it's a risk. Yeah, it's really hard. And yeah, you should go in eyes wide open. But remember, like, you're not just playing for the moment. You're really playing to make sure that you are the person that you wanted yourself to be, And I think, again, as advice, I would say earlier is better, younger is better. And take that risk, take that at bat, and surround yourself with as many smart people as possible. Cultivate serendipity. So get into programs if you can, like Y Combinator is great. I recommend them. Techstars, I hear good things about. All that stuff. Be around entrepreneurs like you, because I think that's the fastest way to success, and surrounding yourself with some incredible people.
Excellent. Great advice, guys. Well, I'm going to stop recording here in a second, but there's a couple of questions that we'll just answer after the recording's over. If you guys are cool with a couple more minutes, and anyone that wants to stay on can do that. But thanks, guys. You shared a fantastic story here, and I wish you all the success in the world. You're on the right trajectory, and I hope this housing market stays hot for you. You guys can take advantage of it.
Appreciate it.
So thanks, Jesse.
All right.